I think all my life I've always questioned a lot of things and always been aware that things aren't quite what they seem. But in particular with this issue of chemtrails, I think it became a trigger issue for me to actually do more than just procrastinate and talk about different issues that I thought were important. I've been on a few demonstrations in the past for different issues and things like that, so there was always an interest to try and do something, but never really committed myself to do anything more than that particularly. And I think chemtrails became an issue for me because I was living in a pristine part of rural France where the environment is particularly nice. It's no industry where I live. It's sort of as good as you can get it, really. Trees are all healthy, and the grass is green, and beautiful blue skies. In fact, the area where I live in France rivals Provence for the amount of sunshine hours. It's got the highest sunshine hours in France, and it's a beautiful place. So I think just over a year and a half ago, I'd noticed that the weather wasn't particularly good. And I thought, this is bizarre. I came to live in France because it's such a beautiful place and the climate's really good. What's going on? And I started to see these trails in the sky, and I thought, well, hang on a minute, I've worked outside all my life. Why haven't I seen these trails before? Why haven't I seen them lingering out? I would see those. I haven't seen those before. And I started to, once you notice them, it's very hard to ignore them. But I realised I'd looked at some pictures, and there were pictures that, of the past, a couple of years before. There were the occasional chemtrail in the picture, so they're obviously going on, and I didn't notice it. So something had changed, and I believe that change was they increased the amount they were doing.
And did you find that you came up against the traditional no, it's contrails thing, and that was, did you feel at any point that your fears were unfounded?
Well, I think my first port of call to try and understand what's going on was the internet. And the internet is awash with information about contrails on chemtrails. And I very quickly realised that there was lots of conflicting information, and there had to be disinformation, because it was just conflicting, and some of the information that conflicted was very well done, so there was money going into the disinformation. So I started to understand that there was more to this. So I spent a lot of time trying to find out what might be the truth and deciphering the disinformation from real information. So it's quite a long journey, and it's not easy by any means. You have to really start looking for evidence or information that I could be satisfied was legitimate.
And I mean, this is something that takes up most of your life these days, isn't it? And I mean, obviously there must have come a point at which you passionately and irresistibly felt you had to take steps, do something about it.
Yeah, you're right. I think the real point of being convinced was taking some rainwater to get analysed at the laboratory, and when it came back excessively higher than normal in the ingredients that I'd read about for geoengineering, in aluminium oxide, barium, strontium, it seemed to be absolute confirmation. I could see, visibly, what seemed to be the difference between the year before, which I had lots of pictures because we were renovating a property, and our property's on the side of a hill. So we've got a cliff, we've got caves, and we've got quite an interesting view. So from different parts of the land, I'll be taking pictures, and there's often sky in the pictures. And the year before, when we'd done a lot of work and I was taking pictures of stuff I'd done, the sky was fairly normal. But the following year, that really got me going. The skies were absolutely packed with these grids and these X's, and it was for me, it must have been a dramatic increase. If this program is correct, then I think they must have moved to another level, because it really caught my attention. And the rainwater analysis was definitely at least confirmation that what's falling from the sky in the rain is the ingredients that is very well researched and talked about for geoengineering.
And it's not strictly a UK or European only operation, is it? Whatever's going on seems to be quite widespread.
It's definitely widespread. I mean, it's in India, it's in Japan, it's in Australia, it's in the whole of the Americas. It's even in North Africa. It's definitely in a worldwide phenomenon.
And do you think you're yet at a place where you're satisfied you know exactly what is coming down on us?
Well, we can only be certain from rainwater analysis, and there are some people that have tried to take aerial samples, and they have found amounts of aluminium, but the testing methods that they've used so far, they don't seem to be highly indicative for the nanoparticles.
Nanoparticles, these are really, really
incredibly small particle that's just a millionth, it's 1,000,000th, oh no, or 100,000. I actually not, I think it's milli, micro, nano. It's ridiculously small, ridiculously. I think we can't comprehend that. It's like a molecule in your cell.
And it's difficult, if you do spend any time looking up at the sky, it's difficult to conclude that there isn't something going on. What do you think is the long-range aim? Because obviously there's been talk, particularly with the What in the World films, about possibly people feeling that they're actually helping with things like solar radiation management. How much truth does that hold, do you think?
Well, for me, I have been spending a lot of time filming the skies because I wanted to, first of all, to record it because I felt it was bizarre and it needed to be recorded. But secondly, I was looking for anything that might suggest there's something going on rather than the disinformation line, which I believe the contrail frequently answered questions you might get if you write a letter to your MP. I wanted to find something that would prove it wasn't actually going on. So I've watched the skies a lot and filmed it a lot. And the idea that it could be geoengineering to protect us from the sun is talked about a lot as a suggestion to the solution of global warming, which is a threat that the governments around the world are reacting to. They say that there's a big problem. So I've been thinking, well, if they definitely are doing something in the atmosphere, I am convinced they are spraying. If it's for geoengineering, I don't understand why they do it at night time. They spray at night time. I've tried to film it, but unfortunately I haven't got the right equipment to be able to capture it. But in the full light of the moon, you can see I've taken photographs of it, but I haven't been able to film it. My camera just won't, technologically can't do that. But I know they spray at night time. So if it's for geoengineering, why do you need to protect us from the sun at night? And also, they don't do it all the time to create a blanket. Sometimes it's just in specific locations and it's not everywhere at once. So if it's a geoengineering, I suppose they could be doing small scale experiments, but they're doing it everywhere around the world, but in different locations, different times. It doesn't make sense if it's for geoengineering. For me, geoengineering is about creating a reflective particle blanket to reflect back the solar radiation.
I mean, even quite without the chemical aspect of what may or may not be in chemtrails, there's an issue over emissions, isn't there? Aircrafts, certainly in the UK and Europe, it seems are exempt from emission control.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I don't even think they pay tax on aviation fuel, or carbon tax. Yeah, I think basically the aviation industry seems to be exempt from a lot of things, and it's strange when they talk about carbon footprints and they talk about how we need to be careful, and they try to tax us, say we've got to change our habits, and there seems to be more jets flying than ever before, especially low-cost airlines. And I would suggest, well, why aren't we using high-speed trains or some other alternative transport? Why are we allowing so many planes that could be damaging the ozone, putting up volatile particles from just the exhaust of, I mean, they use a lot of fuel, a large percentage of fuel. I mean, if you compare it to driving a car, you know, it's a phenomenal amount, thousands and thousands of litres they are using for each flight. You know, so it doesn't make sense to me that we would be putting all that pollution up into the atmosphere, which I believe is quite sensitive, the atmosphere. You know, it's not something we can just abuse and expect no problems.
I mean, the idea of global warming, as it was originally called, and climate change, it's been kind of rebranded, and the idea that it's anthropogenic, that man is causing this problem. What do you feel about that?
I've looked into that quite a bit to try and establish whether or not it's a real problem and whether it's our activities. And I can understand why people might feel it might be our activities, because everyone can recognise huge changes in man's activities and the amount of toxins that are going into the environment. First of all, I'd like to say that that's not us, we the people, that's the industrialists, that's the globalists, the leaders of industry are the ones that decided everything should be packed in plastic, or they're the ones that have got we don't own big petrol refineries, we don't own big chemical companies. These are the sources of great toxin problems to the planet. So it's not our fault that that's happening, but people are aware that there is a problem. So it's quite easy to associate the suggestion that the activities of man is having a terrible effect on the planet, because we know that the poisons are going into rivers from the petrochemical industry of farming and everything else, so people can associate that as a problem. When I started to look into this, I started to come across different reports, and I came across an NGO organisation, non-government organisation called the Club of Rome, which is a think tank organisation. And in the 60s, they were writing about how to bring about one world governance. And they wrote specifically that they would use the concept that man's activities was a threat to the planet and the resources were limited, and that our activities would affect the planet, therefore making man's activities a threat that would need to be altered. Now, I haven't quoted that verbatim or anything, but that's the gist of it. And so basically there are strong suggestions that this has been orchestrated as a trigger issue that will allow them to bring about massive change. So geoengineering is the response to global warming, but if we look at global warming, I found some evidence from Nordic scientists that were researching the activities of Vikings in Greenland. And the Vikings were settled in Greenland for 300 or 400 years, for quite some time. And they were able to grow barley. And the climate had to be significantly warmer because it's completely frozen now. And so they found that they were growing barley. And some people in the past, they were growing vines in Yorkshire in the Roman times. And basically there's lots of evidence to suggest that the Earth goes through many cycles. And during the Middle Ages, there was a mini ice age, which basically, that's why the Vikings had to leave Greenland, because it got colder. And there are lots of reports of the Thames freezing over. There have been markets on the Thames, and basically we had a mini ice age. So we've come out of that and it's getting warmer, and basically the Earth goes through lots of cycles. Scientists know this for a fact, and I think they've just used this as an excuse for a bigger agenda, and the agenda is to change the way the world is running. They want a one world government system using the United Nations model to control the activities of nations around the world, to bring about a one world government. And I think that's the real reason for it.
And you think that aspects of chemtrailing is a piece of that jigsaw, do you?
Yes, I do, definitely. I have looked into the fact that it is used to control the weather or modify the weather for their greater plan, but I think that's only a part of it. I think it's a multifaceted program, and one of the reasons I am spending so much time working on this right now is because where I live in the beautiful part of France, which has no industry and no pollution, all the trees and all the plants are showing stress signs. Their immune systems are breaking down across all species. And this is particularly worrying because they all seem to be showing the same symptoms. So I'm fortunate enough to have a bit of land, and I wanted to plant a forest. And I was reading about the best way to go about it, and it's a good idea to mix different tree types, so that then your forest isn't susceptible to disease. Because sometimes some trees there might be a disease that will affect them, like ash or like chestnut trees or like the box trees, and there's different types of diseases that can suddenly appear. So if your whole forest is just planted one tree, you could lose your whole forest. So it's a good idea if you want a forest to plant a mixture of different types of trees, so that way hopefully you'll have a bit healthier forest. But this is across all species, so it can't necessarily be a disease. A disease might be showing up on some of them because their immune systems are stressed. So I mean, I'm no botanist, I'm no aviation expert, but I'm certainly someone who's concerned, and when I'm concerned I research about it and apply my practical problem solving skills and try to find a logical solution.
And how easy are you finding getting answers out of people in terms of perhaps scientific organisations, universities, government departments, that kind of thing?
Well, it depends what we're talking about. When I visited Oxford University to talk to the people running the geoengineering program, because I really find it difficult to. The government basically seemed to keep my interest at arm's length, which I find quite frustrating. And because I don't live in England, unfortunately my French isn't good enough to be dealing with this problem in France. So using my mother language, I'm contacting people in England, and because I don't live there, they can quite easily say, well, because there are strict parliamentary rules, because I don't live in their constituent, they can't answer questions. So I've written to several different MPs, and basically it's the same answer all the time, and they now give you a frequently answered question. So I know that the establishment's difficult for me to get to. So I went to Oxford University. The reason being is because in 2009, the British government produced the Science and Technology Committee report, the 5th report on geoengineering, the regulations for geoengineering, and it was quite a long report, very in-depth. They used a lot of information from the Royal Society, who just released a big document on geoengineering and solar radiation management and different methods to force the climate, because geoengineering is about forcing climate change. It's managing the climate through using science.
But these are theoretically these proposals rather than a blueprint of what they're doing, no?
Well, it depends on how you investigate it. I've been looking into how long have they had an interest in controlling the weather. And I found out that in 1952, the RAF, working with a team of international scientists, were cloud seeding in Lynmouth and Devon, and they were cloud seeding to make it rain. And they got the dosage wrong, and they caused terrible floods and storms and killed 35 people, and that was kept quiet, and that they didn't come out for 50 years. So I started to realise there has been long-term experimentation trying to control the weather, and the more you look into it, you actually find out there's a massive interest in controlling the weather, and there always has been. As long as the technology would allow it, as soon as the technology would allow it, they've been experimenting with it. So there's a very mature long-term program in controlling the weather, and the only way you can find out is by researching the information. There are documents that for nearly 20 years in America they were trying to learn how to manipulate hurricanes, called Project Storm Fury. We know that they were, in fact the list is so long, it's incredible, the amount of research, even by changing the ionosphere, by exploding nuclear weapons in the upper atmosphere, which has changed the polarity of the ions in the atmosphere. It's to do with weather control and trying to experiment using satellites for controlling space weather that will influence weather over globally. So I mean, it's really is, when you start to look into it, it's extraordinary how all of this can go on, and most people have no idea the amount of investment of people's time and projects. And this is global. This is many universities and many institutes all around the world are doing this.
And given that there must be people sufficiently educated and aware of what their actions are creating, what the repercussions, what the results of their actions are, why do you think it's so rare to have people come forward and start talking about this from within the mechanisms themselves?
Well, what I've certainly realised is the universities are restricted to what they can research, what they can talk about, what access you can have to talk to lecturers or professors. They're very cagey, really, and it's quite clear they get funding so that their interests are pleasing the funders. So whoever's sponsoring them, commissioning them to look into certain things, whether it's the government or whether it's big institutions, they're restricted. They don't necessarily allow to share that information. They only publicise it within their own communities, so it's not necessarily publicly known. So unless you're looking for it specifically, I look for a lot of scientific journals, and some journals are freely available, and many of them you have to be registered and you have to be at an institution, and the institution has to register you so you can get access to those documents. So there's a mechanism to stop you freely accessing what might be going on. So I would need to belong to a university and have permission to register with that, and then I would have access to the papers. So within the international community, scientists can share each other's papers and have access so they can increase their knowledge. But you have to be a member of that community in order to do that. So the public can't necessarily, unless they've got a particular strong interest, they're unlikely to know about it. So, I mean, also a lot of the weather experiments are military. And fortunately, if you're tenacious enough, you can find military documents that have been cleared for release, maybe even going back 50 years ago. Some documents, they get released after 50 years, it's been declassified, and you can get access to it and realise that they were sending barium rockets up into the upper atmosphere to make barium clouds, and they were experimenting making clouds 50 years ago. You know, so you can start to see that there's been tremendous changes to our environment that we're unaware of. So for them to develop a problem in the future by saying there's global warming, I don't think that the scientists are necessarily aware of what the military have been doing. So they've been exploding nuclear weapons in the Van Allen belt, right up in the upper atmosphere, changing the ions in the Van Allen belt. And now they're firing lots of different rockets up there. They're trying to manipulate it to try and control it. Do the scientists that are doing weather control or geoengineering, climate scientists, are they aware of these? I think some of them will be. Whether or not they'll admit that that's causing a problem that might be changing our climate, and I don't know how much of the military experimentation they are actually aware of, but there is no doubt that in my mind, I'm an ordinary person. I can produce documents that I've found that would indicate there's been a very long, methodical, thorough investigation by various countries around the world to control the weather. Now that must have consequences that will affect our climate and perhaps raise data that might get innocent scientists that aren't aware of this, perhaps because they've been doing their own thing and they haven't really been researching like I have, specifically looking for it. Maybe they're coming across data that might alarm them. Or in some cases, maybe the data has been skewed to alarm them, such as at the UK Climate Research Centre at the East Anglian University. They've been hacked 3 times. One time it's in a paper, but it's actually 3 different times. And it's been proved that they are skewing the data to fit a desired model that would alarm maybe some other climate scientists that are innocently working with something they believe is really important and alarming them according to data they're working with. So some might be innocently working hard with a model they believe is legitimate, and others will be aware. So I think there's not enough communication going on. There's not enough dialogue. There's not enough interaction, and I certainly found it difficult to get access to the people at Oxford University.
So what do you feel, given that kind of level of compartmentalisation and actually complete misdirection may well be going on, what's the plan for us for the future? What can we do about this? What can the ordinary man or woman in the street or watching this, what can they do about it?
Well, I think the key The key thing is, that I realised, is that people aren't educated to what's happening. They're completely unaware. So the concept, when you say to people, do you know that the weather's being controlled? Their immediate reaction is, you can't control the weather, that's nonsense. That's the immediate reaction, because people really have no idea what's been going on. And so it seems to me the most important thing is researching what's happened. Now we can all do that, because I've done that, and I'm no computer expert. I even struggle using the computer to get this information, but I've managed it in a relatively short time. And I'm sharing all the information I've found, because the only way we can help people to educate themselves by providing the evidence. And if all the hard work I've done can be shared, and someone else will come along and get a step up and be able to quickly educate themselves, where it took me a long time of searching for it, then that way we can help to increase the understanding of what might be possible, because people really just don't understand, because they're not educated to it, and it's not their fault. It's just that you have to go searching for it, you have to go looking, because they're not advertising it.
No, quite the reverse, you might say.
Yeah, they're hiding it without a doubt. And in fact, I think that I've still got more information to find, I'm sure. But I think with what I've found already, it's quite conclusive that I would like dialogue with the climate scientists, with these geoengineers, to discuss all the verifiable documents that I found, the military documents, the scientific documents, that's building up a picture that's quite clear that our climate has been interfered with and modified for quite some time. And that geoengineering isn't necessarily the way forward if you look at what the facts are, the authentic facts. And I think that's a problem. I think that different people are working in different areas and they're not all communicating. There's whether that's by design or whether or not that's incidental, I'm not too sure. But if I as an independent, concerned person can research all this information, I'm certain that these people have got far better experience than I have researching information and finding information, who are scientists and everything else. I'm quite certain that if we start talking and we can communicate, and they can see the documents that I can produce, they will be able to do a much better job than I can, if they realise maybe they haven't looked at this area before, they haven't put the dots together. I think it's just a case of people are not aware, and it's raising awareness and making them think in a different way. And also I realise, because of the stonewalling from the government, and they are the ones, in particular in the UK, they are promoting geoengineering as something that's urgent, that should be done as soon as possible. And what I found was, when we talked to the people in Oxford, I ended up talking with somebody who works for the department that's organising the governance of geoengineering. And she confided in me. I asked her, I didn't trick her or anything, but she said, I believe that the governance, the regulations for the governance of geoengineering is at an advanced stage, and she agreed, yes, they are. And I'm concerned that they want to go public with this. So I know the government are pushing it, but I'm not necessarily certain that all the scientists and all the people within the establishment know the bigger picture. So if they're just operating from a certain position, they might be quite legitimately concerned or doing the best job they can in their position. But I don't think the whole picture is really understood. So that's where raising awareness and drawing all these different elements together is a unique factor, because no one seems to be doing this.
So potentially then asking questions of, in the UK, people like the Met Office, Department, DEFRA, talking to your MP, those are not useless avenues at all.
No, I think it's very important actually that people should let these departments know that they're concerned, because at the moment most people are even unaware that they need to be concerned. So by raising awareness and alerting them to verifiable facts, they will become concerned. And when they are concerned and they start alerting the government systems that people are waking up, they're aware that there's a problem, because this information has been collated and shared, I think that the government will have to react. All the while people aren't really complaining or letting them know they're concerned, they just carry on. And then it is only public reaction that will force change. If sufficient number of people are constantly phoning up, writing letters, writing emails, contacting them whichever way, and letting them know, hey, this can't carry on. This is no good. We don't want this. That's when we'll get changed. It's only through public opinion. And actually, one of the organisations the government set up to try and promote geoengineering is called the Solar Radiation Management Government Initiative. And if you look at their site, that's a non-government organisation that's been set up to lobby other nations to accept geoengineering. They've had a summit in Lima in Peru, they had a summit in Ethiopia, where they invited all the people of that region to explain to them about geoengineering and promote geoengineering, because there's transborder issues of spraying particles into the atmosphere. So we know that they're very active promoting it, and they want this. But on that site, they admit the people have to be informed because they're paying for it, that people they need to understand the science, because they admit the science is not settled. Because unless you've been doing it for a while, you don't know what the side effects are for definite. You can model the side effects, you can predict them, but until you're doing it, you cannot be 100% certain. So there's a longitudinal study they cannot do to confirm what the results will be. So they have to take their best guess, or maybe do small experiments and try to find out. But how do you do that when you're talking about spraying particles into the atmosphere and be able to be accurately convinced or conclusive whether it's safe, whether it's dangerous, or what's it going to do to the climate, what's it going to do to the trees, the plants, what's it going to do to human health? How can you establish, with such a massive program of spraying particles 10 kilometers up into the air, how they're going to drift in the atmosphere with different winds, different high pressures, low pressures, where that's going to travel to, how long will it take for the cumulative build-up of all these particles in life, in the environment, in humans. You know, there's an awful lot of research into the effects of the particles they're going to use on the health over the years, for different reasons.
So if it's a given that it's known that this stuff is going to be damaging to human health, there's presumably relatively intelligent scientists that are part of the program. What do you think is the agenda behind it? How are they explaining to the people working in the system the necessity to do something that has such grave health risks for everybody?
Well, I can only comment about what I've heard. And when there are a couple of leading American geoengineers that tour around the world promoting geoengineering. They are Professors David Keith and Ken Caldera. And basically they go speaking at conferences, at media opportunities, promoting geoengineering. So they talk about it. And what they say is, it's a risk-risk decision. They claim that global warming or climate change is going to be such significant impact that if they don't do it, the risk is too great. They're trying to say maybe their modelling is correct and there will be terrible climate catastrophes that will be far-reaching and cause lots of problems. Or the other side of the risk-risk scenario is there will be winners and losers, and it's so dangerous that the risk is to us by using geoengineering. So they openly admit, yes, there are a risk, but they try to weigh up which is the worst risk. They're saying if we don't do it, we could have this problem. So it's all a lot of ifs. Now they talk about global warming being a big issue, and they frightened everyone a great deal about 15, 20 years ago. And the temperature forecast is not accurate. In fact, we've been going through a cooling period. Although, if the covert geoengineering is going on, they may try and say they've been doing it secretly, and that's why we haven't had the warming. Because there's a man who's quite well known in the climate arena called Lord Christopher Monckton, and he is an advocate for proving global warming is a hoax or a fraud, or debunking it. And he is just as prolific as the geoengineer people promoting it. but doing the opposite, saying that global warming is a hoax, and he goes around, and he's very knowledgeable, and he talks about it, and it occurred to me, is he working with them trying to prove inadvertently that geoengineering works? If the governments were ever to go public and say, we've been doing this as an experiment because we needed to know, so we're doing it on a small scale, are they going to turn around and say, well, actually, yeah, Lord Monkton's correct, there hasn't been any global warming, and you can thank us because we've been doing it in quietly because it was too much of a risk scenario that we had to save you from this terrible global warming situation that they were talking about in the first place. So I don't know that. That's complete speculation on my part. It's just me putting pieces together. So I don't know if that's real, but I suspect that very strongly. But I'm certain that when David Keith talked about geoengineering spraying alumina, which is aluminium oxide, into the environment, particularly because that's a reflective particle, and it's cheap. He emphasises that quite a lot. He was questioned whether or not this would be dangerous to the health of people and the environment. And at that point in this particular interview I saw, he said that they had not looked into the toxic dangers of aluminium, spraying large quantities, huge amounts of this into the atmosphere. Now at that time, when I started looking, I found a research document from Wrights-Patterson Air Force Research Laboratory at that specific time. Well, actually, it was current at that time. And it was looking at the effects of the cells and their function in the lungs, and whether they would be affected by aluminium oxide. And it was quite conclusive that the negative impacts, the reduction in the normal cellular activity, and the subsequent health impacts of the immune system breaking down was quite conclusive. And that was at the same time. So he must have been aware of that, or he should have been aware of that. If he's promoting something as big as geoengineering, spraying all this in the atmosphere, he ought to be aware of the latest studies.
And when are we talking about? Early 70s?
That was 2001 in that particular document. There have been many studies into aluminium, because aluminium it's an abundant metal. It's everywhere, but it's a particularly volatile metal, and it's highly toxic. But because it's so volatile, it binds to other elements, so it's absolutely everywhere. It's truly abundant, but it's in a safe form because it's bound to other elements. So when we can consume this in food and things like that, but we pass it through because it's not in that volatile state. It's because it's bound to other elements. So generally, it's been very well understood, but we can get exposed to more refined versions of it, the volatile versions, which would be the particles they would spray in the atmosphere. So I found many documents finding out about the effects of aluminium on our health. So it's very well understood. It's a toxic element, and it causes great harm. It's been linked to Alzheimer's, it's been linked to autism, it's been linked to many different well-investigated illnesses that are rising, which is another suggestion that maybe they are spraying it into the environment, because why are these different types of associated illnesses exponentially rising? There is a correlation with the reports of chemtrailing and the increases of the illnesses that are connected to aluminium exposure. So, you know, these are like little pieces of the puzzle that sort of suggest that there is a connection, although that's speculation because there's no disclosure. It's trying to find things that are strongly indicating that there could be a link. So I think back to the risk scenario, the evidence is there that aluminium is very dangerous to our health, and it's linked to many illnesses. So why would you do that? Why would you think that that's plausible? And, you know, I think that the planet has self-regulating systems, and it's a huge organism, really. It's a huge system that interacts around the whole of the globe. It's one system, and it works for itself. It works in balance. It's harmonious. It goes through lots of cycles. It's been around for a lot longer than we have, and you know, life is still here. It's survived all kinds of catastrophic changes, And I think it's very arrogant and almost like a King Canute trying to stop the sea. These scientists think, yeah, we can do this, we can experiment. But they're experimenting with our lives. And actually that goes against the Nuremberg Code. You're not allowed to experiment on the public, on population, without their consultation and their consent. Now, you can't say categorically it will work, because until you're doing it and you can understand the longitudinal effects, you cannot be certain. So I think they're not really informing everyone in a comprehensive way about the true dangers and the health impacts and the environmental impacts. I think that it's all about frightening everyone with the scare tactics about the climate change and how dangerous that might be, and the fact that people react to the fear that makes them accept the solutions from establishment they trust. But like I said earlier, they don't know the full story. When I heard that there were obviously the 2 nuclear explosions at the end of the Second World War, which were absolutely devastating. When I found out that there's been over 2,000 such nuclear explosions in experiments, every country with nuclear weapons has tested frequently their nuclear weapons. So the environment gets changed. Those radioactive particles, the blasting of holes in the ozone, the exploding nuclear weapons in the Van Allen belt particularly concern me. I can't understand how scientists can feel comfortable that doing such a possibly far-reaching draconian experiment that could risk damaging the ionosphere, which is our shield that protects us from the radiation from the sun, is a plausible experiment to do, and no one knows about it. You know, it could have far-reaching consequences. Who knows? They could rip open a hole in the ionosphere. At the moment, they're using these ionospheric heaters, which are antenna arrays, which send up massive amounts of microwave energy into the ionosphere. And they heat it up, and they swell, and they make holes. They're not sure if those holes will form back over again. They're not certain. So basically, they are using far-reaching technology, and they're not certain what they're doing. They claim that they modelled it and they understand everything, but they cannot for certain until they've done it. So it's their best predictions. Or they look at smaller experiments and say, well, it reacted that way. Their experiments are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they are building more installations. There are installations such as HARP in Galcona in Alaska, which is the High Active Aurora Research Program, which is a 10-hectare site of antennas that put this enormous amount of energy up into the atmosphere for so-called experiments. There are different sites like this popping up all over the world. There are many of them. So rather than just doing a little experiment, the scientific community of the world are embracing this, and they're all having a go at it. And you know, even the European Union have funded the next installation and modification of the IceCat ionospheric heater in Norway, which is a 3D system, which means they don't have to direct the antennas anymore. The antennas are stationary, but it's a new system so that it can just work. They can direct the energy in a new way, which means that they can do their experimentations far quicker. They don't have to relocate the direction of the antennas anymore. They can do multiple experiments simultaneously in multi-seconds. So rather than just doing an experiment, they're obviously very engaged in a massive experiment, and they're investing in it, they're increasing it. And I think that a lot of this activity is very underreported, and most people will have no idea that this is even happening. Even that the EU are funding 14 million euros for one extension to this IceCat 3D unit. And that's an awful lot of money to be spending of taxpayers' money without really publicising what is going on. And I think that there's been a great deal of subterfuge about climate experiments over the last 50 years and the developments. But we're being asked to accept geoengineering, which is their solution to a problem they're claiming, when I'm going to suggest that they've created the problem. Their experiments over these last 50 years have had far-reaching impacts that some people can register that there are changes to the climate, but it's not because of our anthropogenic activities on the planet. CO2 isn't even a driver of the weather. It's not at all. Plants all breathe it in. In fact, we could do with planting a lot more trees and a lot more plants to help the balance. You know, so rather than spraying the atmosphere with toxins, we should be planting trees and helping the planet regulate. But you just made me think actually of global warming. As a scientist who's been looking into the activities of the sun and how the energy that comes from solar flares and various activities of the sun can affect our planet. And it does, and it does affect what happens. So a solar flare comes and we can expect different weather. Well, that happens on all the other planets as well. So the planets go through cycles throughout our solar system. So the idea is our anthropogenic activities, it's kind of very short-term thinking, when the scale of the planet has been here for millions and millions of years going through these cycles. It's almost ridiculous. And I think that confirms for me that the weather experiments they've been doing for the last 50 years, and they're far-reaching to explode nuclear weapons in the upper atmosphere, it's quite clear they're covering up their crazy experiments and their far-reaching consequences and blaming that on global warming, so we can expect the solution, which is geoengineering, which is kind of, you know, there has to be an agenda. There is a program that they're working towards, which I believe I've researched into, and I may have an idea of what that is, which basically is about control, and it's about one world governance, and it's about controlling the weather, controlling nations. There are geopolitical reasons. You can put pressure on nations. If they don't want to subscribe to the one world system they're trying to put into place, they can put economic pressure on them by not allowing them the normal rainfall. So they can deprive them of their rain, and they'll have droughts, they'll have problems producing food, puts them under pressure in a deniable way. Or they can, using HAARP, they can trigger earthquakes, so that you could have geopolitical earthquakes in places like Haiti or China or Iran or Japan. If for some reason they have a geopolitical reason, we're not necessarily privy to those reasons, but we can see the effects of these things. So there's lots of reasons, but one of the predominant reasons that I'm most concerned about now is that I believe they've been doing this spraying for a long time, and I think just over a year ago they increased the amount of spraying. And I think that these levels of toxins are having a visible effect that everyone can see for themselves. If we start examining our trees, wherever you are, you'll see that all the trees are stressed. And this goes across all the species. And I think this is a visible canary situation. Like the miner said, the canaries, if there was a problem with the gas and it was toxic, the canary would die and give them a warning. Well, I think trees are exhibiting signs all over the world. I've read reports, it's happening all over the world, that their immune systems are breaking down. It could be because the pH levels are changing because of the huge amounts of aluminium, which is an alkaline metal that's now saturating the environment, being sprayed there. Or it might not just be a pH problem, it could just be the toxic effect. But I can't confirm that yet, but that's what I'm hoping to do, with the assistance of some scientists, to establish if there is a conclusive connection with an extra saturation of aluminium nanoparticles that would be associated with the very well researched and publicised geoengineering program they're thinking of doing. So I think that we can establish this now, because many people can see and witness for themselves the trees are all having a problem. I also think the problem about bee colony collapse, which has been blamed on possibly toxic effects of pesticides. I think that's a lie. I think that's deception, because I've found a document from a group of German scientists that were researching the effect of electromagnetic radiation on the effects on bees, birds, animals, life. We all need electromagnetic impulses to how our cells communicate. And they were doing far-reaching research into the effects of electromagnetic radiation on bees, and they established that the effects of perhaps mobile phones, Wi-Fi, and they suggest in this document that bee colony collapse was first reported in the areas where they have the HARP facility and other nations that have these ionospheric heaters that have been working now for quite some time. That's where the bee colony collapse was first reported. So I believe that the activities of sending these frequencies into the atmosphere is having a detrimental effect that can be identified. These scientists' work is quite far-reaching. I think it's accurate, and I think other scientists would do well to look at it. It would explain why dolphins, whales, and many other animals that depend on the electromagnetic frequency, the natural Schumann's resonance of the Earth, is so important to them. They've been struggling, they've been beaching themselves, there's been all sorts of drama within nature that's been going on, which has only been happening since the use of these HARP facilities, or HARP type. That's only one facility, but it's easy to generalise and call it HARP with the various different installations around the world. It seems quite clear that if you start looking at the experiments they've been doing, the fact that they are putting these huge amounts of energy into the atmosphere, and then compare documents that will say that this type of energy, these type of frequencies is harmful, it doesn't take that much. You don't have to be a scientist, you can just be an ordinary concerned person, research, put them together and realise there's a connection.
Max Bliss, thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you.